You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and work experts. We talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at, what they do every day, and what they see coming next for the future of work. Hope you enjoy.
Taylor, welcome to the Modern People Leader. Well, welcome back in a different context because we've been together, but it was in the context of your podcast. So I feel like that's not entirely true. Like, we've been together before, but this is the second half, I guess, of our conversation and our commitment. And we're so excited to have you. We're going to talk about a topic that you can't seem to get away from these days, but we'll get back to that here in a sec. And so we start every podcast the same way. We call it Good News Stories. It's a way that we can kick the show off with a little positivity, and we all share a personal or work-related story from the past week or 2 weeks, something to kick us off with. And so we like our guests to go first. So if you don't mind, what good news do you have?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. It's the same great conversation continued, just a different place, is the way that I view
Love
it. And the past week, I'll give a personal because we were just talking about children, and my son, who is now talking more and more, he has finally connected that my mom, his grandma, doesn't live here. She has to fly in. So now every time a plane flies over our house in the past week, he says, "Hi, Grandma. Hi, Grandma."
That is so cute.
And I'm just like, it melts my heart. So that's what's been getting me in the past week.
I love that. Daniel, you want to go next?
Yeah, I can go
I know
next.
yours, and it's exciting.
Yeah, so we are very rigorous about pretty much everything we do at the Modern People Leader. And one of the things that we're pretty good at is tracking all of the metrics, whether it's listenership, social media following, revenue. I mean, sales reach outs, we track literally everything. And I think when you do that every week, you can sort of reflect and think about all of the work that you're putting in. And so when all of that work finally pays off, it really hits different. And for us, we just had a record quarter at the Modern People Leader on many fronts, but the one metric that every company looks at every week is revenue. And so from a revenue standpoint, we 3x'd our previous record quarter. It's looking like Q2 is shaping up to be the same or even better. And so I know that money is not the most important thing in the world, but when you're running a business and you have a family
Bootstrapped.
when you're bootstrapped, and I mean, literally, we started from zero. There's no funding of the Modern People Leader. It's just me and Steven, just blood, sweat, and tears. And so when it works, it feels really good, and it feels like we're on the right track. So I'm really proud of us, and I will say that a big part of that success, just to give Steven some kudos, is having Steven on the podcast full time. He's been a co-host on the podcast for the 4.5 years that we've been doing the pod. But up until around November of last year, it was just me running the business solo. And we've been moving so much faster on all fronts when it's the two of us. So shout out, Steven.
The kudos right back to you because it was a joint effort. And it's one of those things when you are super passionate about what you're doing and you've been in this for so long, in my case, 25 years, things just, when they come together, you can see something that you feel like other people can't see. And we've just been running with it, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been a good year. My good news story, I'm going to go personal because I can't top that business. I mean, it's not everything, but it's also everything to Daniel's point. My good news, we're in the birthday zone. And so for whatever reason, the universe just put all of our a lot of spring birthdays and early summer birthdays. And so we're in the thick of it. So my oldest daughter, Astrid, she turned 15 last Sunday, which is wild that I have a 15-year-old daughter. I remember when she was pointing to the plane and waving and saying just the cutest things. The other birthday that we have this week is my father's birthday, and he's turning 83. And so I have my daughters this weekend, and my dad's going to be in town because he's getting his passport for our wedding in Costa Rica. And so it's a celebratory weekend. In addition to that, we have we have the baby shower. So it's going to be a lot of family time and a lot of celebrating. And I'm super excited about that. So that's my good news.
Some of the best news. I feel like those were three excellent good news stories. And so, Taylor, I was actually before this, or maybe this was last night, I went on YouTube and I looked up your name. I was like trying to find a recent episode, and one of the thumbnails was like, this HR leader did this before they went into HR. And I'm really like struggling to remember what that was. And it's making me really want to hear your story again, because I know it's been like 5-6 months since I've heard your story when we did the prep call. So what's the Taylor story? Like, how did you get into HR? How did that lead you to, I'm going to butcher the name of your company, Turing? Is that right?
Turing, yeah.
Turing. Okay. I struggle with that word. I don't know why, but
That's right. That was within one deviation.
Okay,
So
good.
yeah.
I was close enough.
Yeah. The story, I should just like question you of what do you think my job was, but I'll let you off the hook on that one. So I started my career as a firefighter, paramedic, and hazardous
Yes, that's
materials
what it was.
technician.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was, I loved doing that. That's a unique career. It's certainly a calling. And at some point, especially when I met my girlfriend, now wife, decided, okay, I want to settle down. I was doing a lot of remote medicine, traveling around the world and things at that point. And so HR seemed like an interesting career. And the connection was you go from putting out real fires to metaphorical ones. So it just seemed like a natural transition with better hours and pay. So I ended up jumping into a HR role at a healthcare startup, and that was fantastic because I was working with doctors, nurses, and paramedics every day. So there was still that connection. But that's really when I fell in love with supporting HR and primarily working in a startup environment. And from there, one company after another, through mentors of mine, started to get into tech, which I had found really interesting, and specializing in working with companies that are primarily Series D through a pre-IPO journey. And that's what has gotten me all the way to where I am now, which is the head of talent strategy and success at Turing, and also a member of CNBC's Workforce Executive Council.
Question for you on the firefighter paramedic part of
Yeah,
your journey. Have you delivered a baby?
I have.
Okay.
So there's two prongs to that. One, I've done one delivery in the field, which is every paramedic's worst nightmare, to try to deliver a child in the back of an ambulance. Though when you're trained as a paramedic, you do go through rotations, much smaller rotations than doctors go through, but you go to every department in a hospital and spend time there, including labor and delivery and the NICU.
Wow. We have heard a lot of non-traditional paths into HR, but I can't think of one that actually gives you a great skill set like being a firefighter, because there's no shortage of fires in HR. And so like crisis management, I feel like being able to stay cool under pressure has to help in your job. And so I'm just curious, like, can you think of a story where like your background really helped you kind of get through whatever the issue or challenge or situation was? Hopefully not childbirth in the office.
I thankfully don't wish that upon me, Stephen. The thing that I come back to is this risk analysis phase that we had in the fire service, which things that have never happened before happen all the time. And so the mentality that you have to have as a firefighter is coming up with a framework that will help you approach any situation. And I've done talks about this in the past what we use as paramedics is you never know what type of scene you're going to roll up on, and every scene is different in some way. But the framework that we approach to that scene is we assess the situation, determine what the needs are, and then provide an outcome. And then the HR joke is that's ADP. But the concept, that framework, I use still every single day when we get a unique HR request, or hey, we need to go set up an entity in Colombia. Okay, I've never done that before, but the framework is still the same. And that really takes the stress out of it. I won't say that I'm never stressed, but that certainly helps having that framework and the perspective of, listen, everything that we do every day is not necessarily life and death in the way that the high stakes were when you are a paramedic and firefighter. So it's a good perspective to have.
That makes complete sense and totally checks out for me. And so earlier I mentioned we're going to talk about something that we're super passionate that we can't, you can't, if you log into LinkedIn and you spend any time there, you can't avoid the topic. And that is AI. And not only AI, but your journey growing and helping an AI company grow at like Blitzscale pace. So I can't wait to dig into that. But before we do that, I'm just curious, like, if when you are at a dinner party and someone's like, oh, like, Taylor, what do you do? What does your company do? What is your what's your 30-second pitch on that? Because I've seen the summary of the services and it's a lot. So how would you explain to our audience what Turing does?
Well, generally, if I'm at a dinner party and I say I work in HR, that's where the conversation ends. But let's add to the hypothetical. To simplify what we do, we break Turing down into two parts: AGI advancement and Turing intelligence. AGI advancement, to oversimplify, is working with companies, primarily companies that own and develop LLMs, large language models, and work with them and their models to improve the outputs that their models can do. What we've seen in the past week is Twitter get flooded with the new images that come from ChatGPT and its capabilities around image editing. That's the type of work that we do on the AGI advancement side. My favorite team is our advanced mathematics team, where we have mathematicians and PhDs from around the world that work with these models day in and day out to get them better at responding to mathematics, statistics, physics type questions so that the models continue to advance. That's AGI advancement. Simplify. Turing intelligence is how do we take AI and embed it into the workflows of a business? And the Turing intelligence teams works with organizations to understand what those needs are and develop custom app engineering specific and tailored to their industry and to their particular workflows.
And so I would imagine that what you're selling at Turing is in high demand. Is that, what does that look like the last few years?
Well, in 2022, we partnered with a nonprofit that publicly released this thing called ChatGPT in November of 2023. And since then, we haven't looked back. We've been a close partner with OpenAI for some time, but that has really flourished into the broader industry of working with every consumer-facing LLM that's out there that's well known is likely one of our clients in some capacity. And to keep pace with that, we've grown and added thousands of team members in a matter of less than 24 months, with a huge spurt of growth in H2 of last year, where we added thousands of team members in a matter of months. And traditionally, what you'll hear from folks that work in startups is they say it becomes a new company every 12 to 18 months. For us, it was like we were becoming a new company every 9 to 12 weeks. And that required a lot of going back to my framework, certainly, but having kind of a steady, how do we make this scale? How do we make this sustainable for our team? And more importantly, how do we use AI to augment our teams so we can keep up with the pace?
I'm curious to get your opinion. This is not at all tied to the conversation we're going to have, but now hearing what you do, I think a large part of this is education. And you were kind enough to share a report that will be shared broadly. And Daniel and I, we have a really cool job because we get access to this information in preparation for these conversations. And as I was looking through the insights report that we'll talk about later, I saw kind of a framework or an evolution of an executive's understanding of AI and its capabilities. And the first thing that I thought was like, oh my God, HR needs this so bad. And but right now, like there seems to be a proliferation of like resources and classes and educational series on AI and understanding like how much of this is, if you were in an HR leader's shoes, how would you know what to pick and what is a really trusted source of this kind of information? Because it seems like any Tom, Dick, and Sally can put a program together, and every week it seems like a new thing is being launched. And so I'm curious, like, what's your advice to HR leaders that are looking to kind of ramp up their understanding?
The first part of your question around education is the key. And unless you are aspiring to become an engineer, I'd actually encourage HR leaders not to go and pitch, we're going to teach people Python, because that's a whole new career that someone's trying to learn. And the beauty about large language models is they're meant to be interacted with in natural language. So then it's, what do employees need to learn in order to leverage existing tools out there? And my team, about a year ago, we started weekly connects of the most important thing that I can teach you as an HR leader right now, or a new HR generalist, is prompting. And we have been very diligent about getting ChatGPT enterprise licenses. So we have good governance, we have good control over our data. It's a secure environment that our folks can go in and learn how to prompt. And we have now developed what we call a prompt pantry. And it's where my team can go in. They can look at a variety of different prompts that not only did I create, but they've created, that they can use in their everyday. And what's great about just focusing on that to start with is that as people learn how to prompt, they see how their inputs influence outputs. They start to learn how the LLM will think, and more importantly, how the LLM can benefit them. So there are a few interesting prompts in there. I'll share two. One is really useful. It's the measure twice, cut once. You put in your draft prompt of, I want the LLM to do this, but the prompt that you add to it is, take this, what I want to do, and using best practices in prompting and LLM use, rewrite my prompt so that it's more impactful. And then explain to me how you've improved my prompt, so next time I know how to do it on my own. That's been a really interesting one because it's taught people how to actually leverage LLMs. The second is the fun one, is I'm dealing with someone, I know none of the listeners have ever had this. I'm dealing with someone that might have an outsized reaction to what I need to tell them. Look at what I'm going to tell them and put it into context using my tone and style that will help me better land my message with them. Of course, you're still the human in the loop. You need to edit it to make sure that it's not replacing your voice, it's complimenting. But I can't tell you how many times that little prompt has gotten me out of a pickle and have led to actually a productive conversation with someone that otherwise may have had a hypersensitive reaction to what I was going to share with them. So prompting is the key. I would start there. If your team does not know how to use an LLM enterprise license that a lot of organizations have got for folks, so they're underutilizing or not utilizing it, get them to do that, because then that makes AI a friend and not a foe, because they see how it augments them and not replaces the work they're doing now.
For the prompt pantry, is this like a Google Doc with like links to prompts that you've used? Is it like simply a Google Doc with a list of prompts? And the reason I'm asking is because I was chatting with my older brother the other day, and he works in private equity for a family office. So I think maybe there's like 7, 8 people on his team.
Mhm.
And I gave him a crash course on everything ChatGPT, Anthropic, how to use these tools, how I'm using it for business. And this was like a month or two ago. And so fast forward to a few days ago, we're hanging out and I'm asking him like, so have you started using it for any of your workflows? And he's like, I'm really just struggling to figure out how I can use this for the type of work that I do. And I was like, well, tell me more about that. Like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, I was at a dinner the other night with a handful of folks that do similar work to me, and none of us can find use cases. And I was like, okay, like what do you mean? And he's like, well, there's like so many variables that go into these deals that we're putting together, and we're not really doing the grunt work at this point. Like at our level, it's more about figuring out if a company has poor leadership, like how that factors into their valuation, or it's like a bunch of like little things. And he started like breaking it out, like phase by phase of like what he's evaluating on his end. And I was like, well, why don't you just like start asking, like just literally explain all of this to ChatGPT or whatever you decide to use and see what prompts it gives you. And then maybe you can start building a resource of like prompts that you've used that seem to be helpful. And if you explain this to your teammates, maybe they can do the same. You can create like this library. And so I had never heard it called the prompt pantry. And so I'll stop talking. Like, how do you have this prompt pantry organized?
So it did start as a Google Doc, and I put in that first prompt that anyone could put in their draft prompt and would improve it, and encourage the team, go wild. But Daniel, you hit on a really important point that I see as a barrier to AI adoption. Is folks go into using ChatGPT, and we're not even talking about custom apps. They're just going into these custom GPT models or LLMs and thinking, I'm going to replace this huge process. The whole deal making process, it's not going to help me. I don't understand. But you did exactly what we've been researching and developing in our white paper, is you deconstructed the role for him to say, actually, it sounds like what it is probably 100 little things that you do, 40 of which AI may not be a replacement for in its current capacity. That still needs human in the loop. But there's likely 60 or so tasks there that are what AI could augment, but that's a different prompt for each one. And some of the best conversations I've had about prompting have been with the LLM and with ChatGPT to ask them. But one thing I would encourage everyone to do is you typically don't need pro. I actually think ChatGPT's free level does this, is there's the ability to interact with it via voice. And it's almost like you're having a phone conversation with someone. And I find it's really easy for people that may not be comfortable with prompting yet to have that interaction like we're doing right now, but explain the process and then ask it, where do you think that you can provide analysis for me? And as you were walking through that, I don't know the ins and outs of every single task that they do, but there was little things that, oh, they could absolutely augment. And so it's not about replacing an entire role or an entire process right out of the gate. If you try to use AI that way, you will be disappointed. It's finding the right tasks that can be augmented. And that's the graphic that I think Steven's excited for us to eventually share.
Oh my God. Yeah. And there are two things that transformed, because I'm in my 40s, right? So I've been at this, I'm an old head. I've been at this for a while. And two things that, like, working today, I've never had more fun working today. And that's partly because I am very privileged that I get to do a really cool thing, and that is podcasting as kind of the core business. But I also believe that I'm having fun because I've unlocked the like next level capabilities, leveraging this superpower, which is generative AI. And and so it's bringing joy back into things that I like dreaded. I hated writing copy. And so the fact that I have established my voice, I have the tone, how I want to present information out to the world, like it took a long time. And so getting back to my point, like teaching myself later in my career how to work asynchronously, and because it took time, it really took time for me to rewire my brain to truly work asynchronously. And the second was investing the time, weeks to master how to prompt and how to even look at my day-to-day tasks in a way to determine or even be aware of, like, okay, maybe I should be using ChatGPT or generative AI for this. And those two things, and particularly the latter, have just brought a ton more joy into my life. And the reason I ask a question is I think that it is easy to get lost in the pursuit of figuring out how to do this. And so it doesn't surprise me that you have grown from 600 employees to 5,000, because if you can help companies not only understand this, but accelerate it at scale throughout their organization, like, this is gold. Like, I have a belief that AI first companies are going to replace traditional companies. And it's just a matter of like when that happens, not if it happens. And so I believe a lot of this plays into that. And so I want to shift now, like, truly into like what you do and how you're doing it. And so I want to dig into the Blitzscaling, because that is like 600 to 5,000 employees in 6 months, let's call it. That is like a tremendous amount of scale. And so if you reflect on that, like, what are some of the emotions you feel just like looking back on, like, wow, we just did that?
The first is how damn proud of the team I am. What we've accomplished as a people team over the trailing 12 months is rarefied air, and couldn't have done it without the team that I have. And so one is just being incredibly proud of what we've gotten through. Some of it, to be frank, you just kind of get numb to all of the change that you've gone through. If you really think about where you've come from 6 months ago to where you are today, it's like, oh my goodness. But we're also still so busy at this moment and continue to scale. It's part of this journey of, what do I need to do now to make sure that we can 2x headcount over the next several years? And that keeps me pretty focused. But it's kind of that mix of emotion. It's difficult to explain, I feel like.
And so I remember you telling me this in our prep call, that at some point the processes that were in place just broke. It might have been, was it onboarding? I'm trying to remember what exactly it was, but using your company's superpower of being AI first, if I remember correctly, you were able to solve this problem. And not only were you able to solve it, but you built like an internal product that's now, I don't know if you're selling it externally, but yeah, just tell me about that whole story.
Yeah. So there's two use cases that we've been very public with. There's others that are proprietary and we're still developing on the back end. And to be clear to listeners, we are not an HR AI company. We do custom app engineering. We help a lot of HR teams, but it's not necessarily a platform. But what we had in, I think it was October of last year, certainly Q3, Q4, right in that time frame, the CEO called me and said, hey, on Monday, and this was Tuesday, next Monday, we just landed a client. We need to onboard 800 people, and I need you to make a training course and an onboarding program for them. We already had an onboarding program in place, but that was entirely live courses, usually max out of a cohort of 30 or so, just depending on the type. And so I jokingly told him, and then this became our mantra over the past year, is I'm going to AI our way out of this. And I had a conversation with ChatGPT, and I said, my CEO just said this, I need to come up with some asynchronous training instead. How do I do that? Traditional L&D teams would take anywhere per module 2 to 5 weeks to develop a technical based module that requires SME input. And that was where we came up with Alan, based on the namesake of the company. And to put it is simply, what Alan did for us in that period of time is, traditionally an engineering leader would record a 30-minute video to onboard someone to a process or a new program. We'd be able to take that video, put it through the custom GPT we developed in about 48 hours or 2 days. And the output of that was all the content that I would need to make a fully immersive, interactive learning module that used the source of truth of the video itself to populate all of that data for us. So there was not weeks of back and forth with the engineering leader to check the data. It was, no, we built almost instantaneously in less than an hour an asynchronous learning module completely built out. Go back to the SME and say, we need you to review this module. And it blew them away. And what was great is a lot of these were machine learning leaders that we were working with. And so they, of course, loved that we were using AI this rapidly. But that enabled us to go from 2 to 5 weeks processing time per module down to literally an hour. So by Thursday of that week, we had a fully functional onboarding asynchronous program that did not exist about 72 hours before that. And that type of exponential gain allowed us to then rapidly iterate that content. And there's been dozens of different features that have come down the pike. I'll list two. One is we were able to start using synthetic AI voices to replace our engineering leaders. Again, they thought that was hilarious, that they lost their facilitating job. And the purpose of that was, as a user, you wouldn't know the difference between the person and the AI voice. But it improved learning because we had a huge multicultural workforce, so that limited the barrier of accents and things like that getting in the way of the learning process. We could pick regional specific voices. The second is, as a process changed, or as we identified, okay, people aren't picking up this process the way that we're explaining it, we would just go in and change a script and click a button, and then our module was updated. No reshoots from the engineering leader. They were still a human in the loop to make sure the content was correct. And the third piece that has really been the most exciting is I don't have to go into a meeting and mention something like Addy or any of these other methods once, right? That type of instructional design, PhD level knowledge is embedded in the custom GPT that we created. And it takes things like our Slack onboarding channels and reviews all the content and tells us the way that your new hires are interacting with their managers. Here's where you can make some tweaks in your educational material to mitigate them going to managers and asking these questions. Or it seems that people aren't understanding this. And because we're able to update stuff live, we're pushing updates on our content weekly, if not twice a week. That's the AI use case around talent development that we've been really excited with. That's what we spoke on CNBC on. The second one is, when you onboard thousands of people, they have a lot of questions. In fact, we ended last year with our people ops desk handling 52,000 tickets manually. And that, to me, it felt normal, but my understanding is that is a lot of tickets for an organization. And we developed another alter ego of Alan to not just be a chatbot, but it was the beginning of agentic workflows. Of, if someone reached out and they needed to have a password reset, there's ways for us to validate who they are, and then it go in and process that for us. Likewise, it handles all the policy and standard questions, and we hope to eliminate about 60% of those tickets this year. But the other piece that we've been trying to take a new approach on is, how do we make it feel more like a AI teammate? So we started to train it on coaching, on how to interact with managers, how to do better quality work when you're doing engineering. So there's a lot of different personas that go into that version of Alan that we're excited to see the outcomes, and we're going to be sharing those case studies in the near future.
I wish we had you for 2 hours, because the wheels are turning. I feel like Steven's probably feeling the same way. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, I would have been super skeptical of any type of AI voice maybe 4 or 5 months ago. And I don't even know if I've shared this with Steven yet, but I was playing around with Notebook LM for the first time ever. And so we were driving home from Dallas, and we realized that there's still a lot we need to learn about being new parents. And so there's this very popular book called Moms on Call, and it's basically like an instruction manual. And so using ChatGPT, I looked up what are the 4 most popular chapters of this book, give me a full summary of each. I then copy and pasted that into Notebook LM, And in 2 minutes, it created a 15-minute podcast episode between two podcast co-hosts. And I was like, damn, like maybe they're coming for me and Steven's jobs too, because this is really damn good. And so it's cool that y'all are building some of that with your custom in-house tools. And so, we've talked about custom GPTs. We've talked a little bit about agentic agents, or maybe that's redundant, but I it's my understanding that with building agents, like in order to do that, you need to have like all of the, like, let's say you need like the 20 custom GPTs to work. And then an agent will basically just like connect those custom GPTs and bring in a human when necessary. Is that the right understanding of what it means when people say agentic HR or like agentic AI, whatever people are saying? Because I think that can be confusing for people. And so,
It is. I'll cover in two parts. So the first part is the use cases that I talked about minus the agentic flow that's been added into what we've been expanding recently was all achieved without writing one line of code. We did that all entirely with our team using prompting and creating custom GPTs. So when I say that we treat ChatGPT enterprise licenses or whatever LLM license you have as a company as an R&D lab, you should absolutely be doing that. The second is there's a variety of different definitions out there. And if we had an engineer on my team on this podcast, they would have a very technical definition of what an agentic workflow. But all of us were at Transform last week, and there were a lot of AI sessions, the Transform conference in Vegas for the listeners not familiar. And I heard the term agent thrown around a lot. And my coworkers and I, as we were listening, we're like, that's not an agent, right? It's cool that they say that it's an agent. But the concept that I have is you have to create a workflow. It's not magic, it's just math, right? A workflow that can independently operate and go do tasks on your behalf that has some kind of logic to it. And in some of the instances that we have is when a person, or this is one we're exploring right now, when a person transfers between different projects, which happens quite often in our workflows, we want to be able to, once that input is received, the agent be able to go log into our various systems and make all of those changes for us. The informed human in the loop will be at the end to give like the final, yes, this system's working. That's how we're going to beta test it. But we're trying to find low stakes agentic flows to create and test before we get into more of the ones that may have more compliance concerns. But is it operating independently with a specific logic in between systems? And that's where our custom app engineering and the Turing intelligence team come into play. Is we develop all these proof of concepts, we get tangible results, and then we decide what to bring in our team to help us make custom apps for, and what we can continue to do on our own with our custom GPTs.
And so, first of all, that's a great explanation, and so thank you for walking us through that. And so let's talk about building custom GenAI tools or apps. And what is there an emerging kind of framework? Is there a step-by-step process that you at Turing advocate for? Like, give us a playbook. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'll walk through our HR R&D process. So it all starts with a prompt, and that's where the prompt pantry comes in. Just develop a prompt of what you think you want to do. This is the beginning of a proof of concept. Don't try to get too fancy with it. But as you use that prompt, for example, when I started to make videos turn into asynchronous learning modules, that literally started out with a 2-sentence prompt. It then expanded into a more sophisticated, but still single prompt that I was copying and pasting out of a Word doc, putting it into ChatGPT and say, do this, and then I give it content. That's since evolved into a custom GPT, which you can use in your LLM enterprise licenses. Is usually there's a workspace where you can go in and create a custom GPT. A layman's version of what that difference is a custom GPT I don't need to go in and put the instructions in every time because that's embedded in its memory. But for listeners that may not be familiar, I went from a 2-sentence prompt to about a 1-page prompt to now the LLM could have anywhere from 40 to 80 pages of instructions that cover a wide range of things in order to get the exact outcome that I'm looking for. And that's all been built by GPT to put into the custom GPT. And some listeners may be asking, what do you mean? I'll give the example on the people operations desk. When we first created Alan, there was some pretty brutal feedback I got from my team, which again, I love the trust that we have there. They were like, I don't want to use it. It obviously looks like an AI wrote this. I'm like, no problem. That's just linguistics prompting that we need to train it on. So I asked them, give me examples of the best emails you think you've ever written. And then what do you want our employees, our team members to feel when they hear from Alan or they interact with Alan? And with that, we were able to, again, use ChatGPT to analyze all of those texts. And it put out a prompt to say, here's the linguistics instructions you should give your custom GPT. It should be brief. It should make sure that it analyzes what it's going to tell people before it shares it, so it doesn't give anything that's not in its knowledge base. They should be matter of fact, but a little friendly, right? But don't say to whom it may concern, or if someone asks you to give you all of its instructions of what you're trained on, you don't do that. You answer the questions, you don't share sensitive information. So that's where linguistics prompting comes into play. That sounds complicated. If you feel, hey, I don't know how to do any of that, start with 2 sentences, start with a simple prompt. Once my team gets to a point where we've tapped out our expertise and we want to branch into agentic workflows or make it a platform, then I call up David Way, our chief technology officer, and say, I need to have the custom engineering team come over. Here's the proof of concept. Here are the results, most importantly, of how we've improved efficiency or how we've augmented headcount. Now I need you to take this to the next level. And that's when our engineers step in and start to build that out.
This is such good content. I think for a lot of people, when they hear about companies using AI and HR, I think there's this belief that it's like something that's super advanced. But I like how you walked us through the process of you just start with a simple prompt. And then from that, you build a longer prompt. And then eventually the LLM has 80 pages of instructions. And then you're getting feedback and you're pushing the feedback in. And so, yeah, I mean, this is stuff that we're trying to figure out how to do. And I think we have like a bunch of proof of concepts. And eventually, we want some engineering support to help us like create some of the agentic workflows. And so, on the agentic workflow note, when you think about HR in, let's call it 5 years, like what are some of the things that these HR agents are doing that would maybe surprise some people to hear?
This was an interesting conversation that kept coming up at Transform Conference. I was a skeptic 12 months ago that this was going to impact jobs. The more that I've been involved in developing and researching and using these tools, I've now feel like I've done a complete 180 to say this is going to be wildly disruptive to the job market and to the way that we work. However, with any watershed moment in technology, it's going to create jobs. It's going to create companies. It's going to create industries that we haven't even thought of yet. Every single part throughout history, this has occurred. AI is just that new technology, but it's the same pattern. At Transform, though, some of the concerns that I had for folks is there was one conversation I had with a recruiting executive that was staunchly, this is not going to impact our jobs. I've used ChatGPT and I'm not satisfied with the outcome. And I'm like, it probably comes down to prompting, right? When I hear people say that AI isn't doing what they want to, it just comes down to prompting proficiency. And that's a problem that we can solve. And I can walk you through it. But the disconnect was this person worked at a company that has made press releases of the people that they're laying off because of AI. And so this is the stages of grief, I feel like, that some people are going through. But that shouldn't be a barrier for people to explore, how do I ride this wave? How do I get ahead of it and become someone that is being augmented by AI? That's going to be the important piece. And that's what Stephen and I and you were speaking about with the graphic. The most natural progression that I suspect will happen is, right now, we do most of the tasks every single day. There's some automation, there could be some AI. In the near future, there's going to be many tasks that we do as professionals. Let's say we have 100 tasks a day, 60 of them will be augmented or agentic workflows. And that's going to make us much more efficient, but give us a lot more time to go focus on some of the more gnarly issues that we have to deal with. A couple of years from now, with the, mind you, exponential growth of AI, so it's really hard to predict what it will be like a year from now because of the exponential growth that we've had. But let's assume that we continue on this plane. There's going to be a point where HR leaders are managing very small human teams, but managing pretty large teams of AI agents. There will still be a need for human in the loop, because especially with HR and recruiting, you need to ensure that there's not adverse impacts happening. And that's where that human's still going to be invaluable. But that's the, I think, most likely. I still am not convinced about wholesale job replacement for everyone. There will be jobs, particular job families, that are materially impacted by this. But again, every technological watershed moment in history has had this type of pattern play out.
It boggles my mind when I have a conversation with someone who makes a definitive, kind of bold statement that AI is not going to impact jobs, because if you have used it, if you've used Gen AI and done some of the things that we've talked about, and if you guys are like a 9 or 10 on the proficiency scale, Daniel and I are like 7 or 8. We probably meander between 7 and 9 on the like, we're active users of Gen AI. And if you've used it, there's no scenario where this does not impact the workforce, because it is just so powerful. And once, for the companies that are able to sort their shit out and get solutions in place and just start the cultural transformation that's going to be required to really embrace this at scale, it is the potential is limitless, I believe, like, for those organizations. But we're nowhere near there. And so my last question is, what do you think is going to be the breaking point for these companies, the laggards, the people that are still asking, like, oh, maybe I haven't used any of these tools, but it's interesting, this AI thing, because I still see those LinkedIn posts and I'm like, what are we talking about? So I'm just curious, like, what do you think is going to really be the tipping point for companies on this?
Like anything, it's the executives that I've spoken with, it's going to come down to which of their competitors becomes an AI first company first. And that's when executives will start to pull the fire alarm of, oh my goodness, this competitor of ours, AI first, they are getting all sorts of headcount, of productivity. They don't need to expand their workforces in line with growth anymore. They can augment that with AI, but still keep their core workforce. That's when you're going to see this breaking point, and that's when you're going to see requirements and job descriptions of, you must be proficient with XYZ AI technology. Until then, the biggest barrier to AI right now is not a technological one. It is the inertia of the status quo. And the example I give is, when I worked at DocuSign, that technology was revolutionary to do e-signature and made everyone's job so much easier. But the vast majority of people out there did not use e-signature. It took literally a pandemic, global pandemic,
That's
to
wild.
change people's work, right? So until AI starts to take root in organizations and people see these productivity gains and they see their competitors taking off, that's where I think folks that are either in denial or ambivalent to it now can still continue to coast, because there will be some of that dormant time. But there will be a moment, just like ChatGPT, November 2023, where it wildly disrupts the ecosystem and things don't look back. And the final thing I'll say is this is the worst AI will ever be. So when people say it doesn't do what I want to now, I'm like, we're still on like Model T of this car evolution. We got time.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, we only have you for 2 more minutes, so I'm gonna get you through rapid fire questions as quick as we can. As you know, same set of questions we ask every guest. And yeah, so question one: what's one piece of advice that you'd give to someone starting in HR today?
The same advice that I committed to my grandfather before he passed away is never stop learning and never stop helping people.
It's great advice. Question two: if your team gave you a superpower nickname, what would it be?
I'm afraid to ask them, but I feel like it at this point, they would make some kind of prompt pun at this point.
All right, next question. If you could steal one strategy from another company, what would it be?
Anduril has been a company that I've been admiring recently. In their recruitment drive that is labeled "Don't work at Anduril." Love it. Chef's kiss.
Love that. Last one. Who do we need to have onto the show next?
I would not be where I am today without my mentor, Michael Erisman, former CHRO at DocuSign, taking a chance on a young, arrogant kid and developing him into the professional that you see today.
We would love to have him. And then last tradition of the show, one word or phrase close. We all respond with a word or phrase from the episode we want to close with. So it could be one word, could be a few.
Am I first? That's not my phrase.
Yeah.
Okay. Culture drives change, not just code.
That's a much better than mine. I'm going to go with refreshing, because it's so nice talking to someone who knows this stuff in and out, and not just having a surface level theoretical conversation. So thank you. It's super refreshing.
And I'm going to say fired up. I'm like coming out of this thinking, we've got some work to do at the MPL. Like there's so much that's untapped, both in our business and things that we can build for people. So I'm fired up.
Well, Taylor, with that, you told us you had a hard stop. We haven't actively managed ourselves to a hard stop in a long time, and we're there literally right now. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute blast, and it was well worth the wait.
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you both.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We want to know what you think about the show, and you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.